It's conference play time for men's college basketball and women's college basketball. But for the Oklahoma Sooners under Porter Moser heading into their third Big 12 slate under Porter Moser, it's a pretty exciting time for the Sooners heading in with a lot of momentum, a number 11 ranking in the AP poll. Lots of things going their way, but as we've seen before, Big 12 play has been a struggle for this team. We're going to break it all down here on In the Paint. My name is Jesse Crittenden. I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Brody Lusk. Brody, I really like college basketball, but conference play is when stuff starts to get quite a bit more real, don't you think?
Oh yeah, I love just watching Big 12 conference play. There's just every single night there's a great game on, and that's going to be the case for Oklahoma. Every single night they're going to be playing a very great team, and so it all kind of gets started Saturday. We're really going to find out a lot of what this team is made of. But yeah, this is when things just start to feel real. I mean, this is when the gauntlet begins.
Well, in Big 12, obviously the Big 12, I think from top to bottom has been easily the most dominant conference in college basketball for a long time now. This year, no different. Five Big 12 teams ranked inside the top 25. And it was already hard enough, Brody, without adding Houston and BYU, who have absolutely been on a tear so far. It's been really impressive.
BYU is like number 4 in Ken Palm. I mean, I didn't expect. I think they were picked just as low as OU was in the preseason poll, but it just got even more difficult. But the one blessing is that Oklahoma doesn't have to play every single team twice this year. That is definitely a good thing for the Sooners.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for OU, Brody, I mean, we're here to talk about obviously the start of conference play, but I think this is a pretty unique situation for OU who, I mean, they're 11 or sorry, excuse me, they're 12-1 heading into conference play, their best start to a season since 2016. Their only slip up in conference play was North Carolina, a game that despite playing as poorly as they have all season, still somehow hung in that game, had chances to win. But I do think as we've talked about before, I think there's a little bit more excitement about this team heading into conference play than there has been really for the last several years. But I think the thing, we've also talked about this. I think the thing that's been in the back of everybody's mind is conference play going to expose this team? Is non-conference play just a is it a mirage? And what's happened the last couple of years under Porter Moser is this team kind of crumbles under the weight of conference play. It is such a grind. The Big 12, it's not only just the level of talent, how good these teams are, but it's just you've got two really tough games every week. And I think for this team, I think you and I are both confident things are going to be different this year than they have the last 2 years, but we've got a long conference road ahead of us. So I think to kind of lean into maybe some of the angst that some fans have about is this year going to be different or not. I think this is a good time before conference play starts for OU on Saturday against Iowa State at home. I believe that game's at 5 o'clock.
Yep.
I think this is a good time to talk about maybe a couple of questions for this team heading into conference play. We've seen 13 games of this team, a lot of moments that looked really good, but Brody, if we're looking at what are the questions that this team have to answer, or what are the questions that are gonna define Oklahoma in this year's conference play? What's the number one question to you that stands out in terms of how this season might be defined for them?
Yeah, I'll give you two. The first one would be 3-point shooting. I mean, you got to be able to knock down threes, and in particular, Oklahoma needs Los Uzan to start shooting the ball better and even Latrey Darthard has to start shooting the ball better because teams in the Big 12, you don't want to put them in a situation where they can just go zone and you can't shoot them out of it because right now I think a team could go zone on Oklahoma and all they've got to worry about is JV McCollum from behind the arc. And Otego away, he shot the ball well, but I don't think a team's going to really be scared of him beating them from behind the arc. So that, to me, you got to shoot the ball better. Uzan was 40% last year, and I believe he's 26% right now. So, and I think he'll start shooting it better, but that has to come. He's got to step up. And Darthard, he was 1 for 7 against Monmouth. He did hit one late in the second half. But if he's going to be a 3-and-D guy, he's got to bring the first part of that. He's got to be able to shoot the three. And then turnovers, that they got to get better on that. And that's kind of been an underlying issue in I think all three of Porter Moser's teams so far. You can't turn the ball over against Big 12 teams. It's gonna you can do it against Central Arkansas and still end up winning by 20, but not against the Big 12 team. And that is something that you're going to see against Iowa State. Iowa State, I mean, I saw a chart on Twitter, and they're like in top 2 in the country in points off turnovers. Like a lot of their like pretty much all of their points actually come off turnovers. So if you turn the ball over against Iowa State, that's just going to I don't think Oklahoma wins against Iowa State if they turn the ball over. And the same can be said for pretty much every single team in the Big 12.
I'm glad you mentioned both those things, Brody, but I really want to dive in first on the 3-point shooting. I'm glad you said that. That was at the top of my list as well. And I think it's so interesting because if you look at the stats and how they've shot the ball so well this season, it seems pretty okay. I mean, 35.5% on the year. You mentioned, I mean, Otega always shooting 72% from three, not on a ton of volume, but 72%. JV McCollum's been awesome, 39% from three. Jalen Moore, again, not a ton of volume, but 43% from three. I mean, 35 and a half, let's call it 36%. It's not bad. It's about average. It's about average shooting, which isn't bad. But to me, I think there's a couple of, I don't know if troubling is the right word, but again, it's not a ton of volume for Otega, but I just don't think he's going to shoot 72% from three. Yeah, I mean, John Hughley, I think, has beefed up that number a little bit because he's technically shooting 44%, but I think 3 of those threes came in one game. And
Yeah.
outside of that, the shooting hasn't really been there. You mentioned it, Los. I mean, he's 12 of 46 on the year, and he has shown he's a capable 3-point shooter, but this also isn't a 4-game sample size. This is a 13-game sample size. And so that number's got to come up. And then, yeah, I mean, Latrey Darthard on the year is 33%, but a lot of his looks are open and
Wide open.
they're wide open. They're not falling. Rivaldo Soares, 23.5% from three. I do worry. I think there have been games where they're just clanking open shots and they're winning because they're better than the other team. But I do wonder if they're going to get exposed a little bit, perimeter shooting wise.
Yeah, North Carolina, they couldn't really get much to fall at all until, I mean, and they were getting great looks. So Darthard's very interesting to me because he is a 3-and-D guy, but he at Utah Valley, he was really good at driving, and he just hasn't really done that this year. It seems like every single shot he takes is a three, and he hit like a mid-range jumper against Monmouth. But that's something that they got to be able to shoot the three better. You mentioned all those numbers. Jalen Moore, Otega Owe, they're actually shooting it quite well. Both of them better than I expected coming into the season. Those are not guys that are going to go out there and like Moore hit 3-3-pointers against Monmouth. That's not going to happen against a Big 12 team. Owe, he's maybe making one a game in the Big 12, I would say, if that. So, it's just they got to shoot the ball better. I think McCollum will shoot it fairly well. It's everyone else that's going to have to pick up the slack. And Hughley, I feel like sometimes he's got to not shoot the ball. Sometimes it just seems like he's forcing it from behind the arc. And if you're making them, that's fine. But when you're missing, it doesn't work.
No, I agree. And that's the thing. It's like, again, it's not about saying, oh, they're not going to shoot the ball well, but that's what's happened the last 2 years is their defense kept them in a lot of games, but it was the lack of scoring and especially the lack of perimeter shooting. Now they are scoring at a much better pace this year than they have the last 2 years. And that's encouraging. They've got obviously a lot more athleticism. They're finishing better at the rim, but you're not going to win conference games being a below average 3-point shooter or a 3-point shooting team. It's just not going to happen. And you mentioned the turnovers, and the thing, it's interesting to look at this year's turnover numbers because they're about the same as where they have been the last 2 years. Again, they're kind of at the bottom of the Big 12 in turnovers like they have been. I mean, they're 10th in turnover margin. They're 12th in assisted turnover ratio. The thing that hurt them the last couple of years is they were playing so slow and not shooting or scoring well enough that when you add the turnovers on top of it, it just collapsed. Now this year they're playing faster, they're scoring better, their efficiency has been better. So turnovers are kind of a byproduct of playing faster, but you're right. turnovers might have been the thing that killed them in games more than anything last year. There were games they were turning the ball over 15, 16, 17, 18 times. You can't have that in conference play. Doesn't matter how fast you play. You can't have that.
You can't have it. And I think as going into conference play, you're going to see the ball in McCollum and Uzan's hands just a ton more. And Owe, he does a lot of nice things, but he also does turn the ball over quite a bit. And that's also just because he's young. He's, not fully developed. So, I think Uzan, he's battle tested in the Big 12. I think he'll come around. He had, I think, 8 assists last time out against Monmouth. I think he'll be really good at, facilitating. And the same can be said with McCollum. But yeah, their pace, I think it's good right now. That's what you want to see. And the way they've been utilizing that 1-2-2 press, I think will help them in Big 12 play. But yeah, turning it over and playing slow, that you can't have that like it happened last year. But, I do think Oklahoma is going to have to take care of the ball, shoot the ball well. That's what they got to do to win games. You turn it over against any of these teams like Kansas or Houston or Iowa State or TCU, they're going to beat you. These are really good teams. A lot of them are top 25 teams. A lot of them will be NCAA tournament teams. So, yeah, turnovers definitely, you can't do it. They've got to improve on that. And a lot of them are just bad turnovers this year. There's just so many where it's like, why are you throwing that pass? So we'll see. I think it will improve, but it definitely has to.
Yeah, I mean, you look at, and this is all melded together, right? The more you turn the ball over, the more it puts pressure to score effectively and efficiently. You look at what they've done so far this year, they're turning the ball over a little over 13 times a game. Their opponents are turning the ball over a little bit more than 14 times a game. So they have a positive turnover margin, but I think the turnovers, if you want to look at one number through all of conference play for any fans, anything, go to turnovers first. Before rebounding, before scoring, look at turnovers. That's likely going to tell the story for this team like it has the last 2 years. I think those are good points, man. I think the thing for me, the biggest question is, can Javian McCollum lead this team? Can he lead this team on the floor? We've seen what has happened the last 2 years. I mean, 2 years ago, it was Jordan Goldwire who just wasn't quite effective enough as a number one option on a
Mm.
Big 12 team. Last year, Grant Sherfield played really well in non-conference play and had some good moments, but he shot 36% from the field in conference play. He took, I think, almost 100 shots more than the second closest guy in shot attempts. And a big reason why OU fell down the stretch is because Grant Sherfield he kind of vanished. And it's clear to me through 13 games, man, that Javian McCollum is easily the most well-equipped guy on this team to be the number one option. Not only just as a ball handler, but as a shooter. He's their best shooter. He's their best scorer. He's probably their best ball handler, obviously alongside Los. On the year, man, he's averaging almost 15 points per game, shooting 46% from the field, 39% from three. Those are good numbers, but he is going to get the primary focus of Big 12 defenses. Can he respond to that? That's one, and continue to be effective. But two, can he also still do a good job of getting other guys involved where it doesn't become the Javian McCollum show? If that makes sense. I don't know. What do you see from Javian? How important is he going to be for the success of this team?
Yeah, McCollum, he's going to be vital. And I think another aspect to that I would add would be late game scoring, because there's so many games from last year. The Texas game, both times, and then they just had a ton of games where they couldn't get a shot down the stretch to get them a win. The Iowa State game last year, Iowa State hit big shots. Oklahoma didn't. Oklahoma has to have someone hit big shots. That is Javian McCollum. He's that guy. He's got to step up. He can't plummet like Grant Sherfield did last year. He's gonna have to keep it going. I think Uzan also has to step up, and when teams are focusing on Javian McCollum, he's got to make them pay. When you can't let a team just be able to say, "Hey, we stop McCollum, we win." That can't happen. So yes, I think McCollum, he's got to be the guy. He's got to get you 15 in the Big 12. And I think he'll have some games where he just goes off for 25, 30 points, but he can't have a performance where he doesn't show up. He can't have that. In North Carolina game, he didn't really show up for the first, half of the game. And then he really showed up late in the game. He's got to show up all game. So I think that's one reason they lost that game is because McCollum he wasn't hitting shots in the first half. So he's definitely got all the tools and he's got to step up. He's a key piece.
That's going to be the tough balance for him, I think, is how do I be the number one guy, because he should be the number one guy, but also how does it not become the JV and McCollum show?
Yeah.
Last year it became the Grant Sherfield show, and he wasn't up to the challenge. That's what happened. And if you're already struggling to score, if you're already struggling with turnovers, and last year's team really struggled with rebounding, that hasn't been the case as much this year. But if you're already struggling in those issues, and then your number one guy can't score effectively, it's a recipe for finishing 15 and 17 and missing the NCAA tournament. That's what
Yeah.
happened last year.
Yeah, I think Oklahoma's defense is going to keep them in virtually every single game because this is really, and they've kind of that kind of has happened a lot of the times in the past 2 years. There was some games last year where they just got boat raced and ran out of the water, but I mean, this year Porter Moser has a lot of guys that really fit his scheme. He can do a little bit more switching 1 through 4. He's got kind of got a lot more of guys that fit his scheme defensively. So I think defensively they'll be in pretty much every single game. But like you said, I mean, like we've been talking about, they've got to have someone hit big shots down the stretch, and they've got to score. You got to make teams pay. So I think McCollum and I think Owe also he needs to kind of just maybe 10 points a game in the Big 12. That'll be pretty solid. You're not expecting him to get 20 or nothing like that, but if he can be someone who's good in transition and he can drive late in the shot clock and get a bucket at the rim, I think that will help. And also these Oklahoma, there's been a lot of games where guys have really been good about knowing their roles. That has to continue. You can't have someone who shouldn't be taking a bunch of shots, taking a bunch of shots. And one player I think is great at knowing his role is Sam Godwin. He's been excellent on the offensive rebounds. He pretty much gets Oklahoma 4 offensive rebounds every single game. I think that's going to come up pretty big in Big 12 play, but also how is he going to handle it when he plays against the Hunter Dickinsons of the world? So it'll be pretty interesting to see how that works down low as well.
Well, that all leads into this weekend, man. Again, I mean, they open conference play against Iowa State, an Iowa State team that's been pretty good this year. They're 11-2 on the season, and it's pretty interesting. I mean, they're third in the Big 12 in scoring. They're second in the Big 12 in defense. They're third in the Big 12 in team field goal percentage. It's pretty interesting to dive into their stats because they're a really efficient shooting team, but they don't shoot a ton of threes. They shoot a ton of free throws. They lead the Big 12 in free throws. They're not a good rebounding team. They're 12th in rebounds. But the other thing we talked about, OU hasn't been great at turnovers this year. Iowa State has been fantastic. I mean, they're second in turnover margin, over 8, plus 8 a game. They're third in assist to turnover ratio. This is a pretty interesting challenge for OU to open conference play, because I think in some ways, I think OU's speed, I think OU's tempo, I think their defense is going to be effective, but at the same time, to me, it's pretty simple. If OU loses the turnover margin and they can't force turnovers, and Iowa State is able to take control of the ball, score effectively, that's a tough recipe for OU. So what are you looking for from this matchup to open conference play?
Yeah, one just kind of matchup that I'm really interested to see how it works is Tamin Lipsey versus Milos Uzan. Tamin Lipsey, freshman, and he really stepped up for Iowa State last year. He was in a way their DeJuan Harris, and he kind of did everything well. He wasn't scoring much last year. He was great at taking care of the ball and facilitating. But this year, I think he's averaging 15 points a game. And he's really stepped up and kind of became a scorer for them. Iowa State has a ton of different guys who are going to play. They brought in 2 5-stars last year. So I think Los Uzan versus Tamin Lipsey. Which one's going to take care of the ball more? Which one's going to set their teammates up more? That's definitely something that interests me. And I think, yeah, it comes down to turnovers. Like you said, I think Oklahoma, they lose if they can't force turnovers and they turn the ball over. And I think it's the other way if they do force turnovers and they don't turn the ball over. So it'll be interesting. Iowa State's got a lot of guys. Keyshawn Gilbert's a pretty good scorer from UNLV. They've got a pretty interesting team, one that I thought coming into the year was going to be really good, but they really haven't played anybody non-conference wise. I mean, I think they lost to Texas A&M was their loss.
Texas A&M and Virginia Tech, their 2 losses. Not great losses.
No, and I feel like every year they just kind of have a okay non-con schedule. And there was a couple common opponents, I think Green Bay and Iowa, but neither of those teams are that good. So I think it'll be interesting. I also think they haven't had their big Hassan Ward for a while. I think he only played in 4 games,
He's only
but
played
they've
four.
got Trey King, who's pretty good down low. I remember last year he kind of came on down the stretch. They've got freshman Omaha Baloo. He's super athletic. And so Oklahoma's going to have to contain him. I'm interested to see how they kind of go about that matchup. Is it Jalen Moore, or do they want to put more on Gilbert? So this should be, I think it's just going to be one of those games that's either really fun to watch or not so fun at all if Oklahoma's just turning the ball over every time down the floor. So it'll be interesting.
You mentioned Lipsy, man. I hadn't looked at the stats in a little bit. And I was going through just looking at this matchup. I mean, 16 a game, 6 rebounds, 6 assists, 4 steals,
Yeah.
4 steals, and he's shooting 43% from three. That's just, man, doing it everywhere. He's effective in every area. He's shooting the ball really well. And yeah, I think you're right, man. And that gets to the conversation of Los. I think Los has had some good moments, but he hasn't really taken the step that I think a lot of us thought he would this year. I think it's going to be really important for him to start off conference play on the right foot. And I think for him, it's been a lot of like, okay, where's my role in this offense? How much am I going to have the ball? How much is Javian going to have the ball? How much do I need to facilitate? How much do I need to look for my own shot? It's kind of in a mixed bag so far. But yeah, I think if there's one player, I mean, we just talked about Javian, we talked about Ortega. I think for me, the one player I'm looking at in this matchup is Los. That's the guy I'm going to be looking at because as much as important as Javian's going to be, Los has got to be an effective co-ball handler with Javian. And this is a pretty good matchup to go up against to see where Los fits in with everything.
Yeah, and I think Iowa State also starts a fairly big lineup compared to Oklahoma. I want to say, let me check here. Yeah, they start Rob Jones, freshman Milon Mamasilovic. He's 6'8", and they also start Trey King. So they're gonna. That's a relatively big lineup. I'm interested to see how Oklahoma handles that because you almost have to take Owe Moore and Moore, who are probably your best perimeter defenders, and you can't really put them on Lipsy or Gilbert. You got to focus more on the big men because they've got 3 guys who can play in the post, and Oklahoma can't have Uzan on Trey King. So I think Uzan and McCollum are also going to have to step up defensively on Keshawn Gilbert. Well, because I'd imagine one of them will get that matchup. But yeah, it'll be definitely a good one to watch. And I agree with what you said. I think Uzan, he's the one I'm watching the most. He's really got to step up. And yeah, I have expected a big step from him. That hasn't really happened. He's got to shoot the ball well. And you mentioned him not really being able to. I mean, sometimes his role's different every single game. I think he just needs to go out there and be aggressive, whether he's being aggressive facilitating or aggressive scoring. Either way, I think that would be huge for Oklahoma if he could just go in there and be aggressive.
Last thing I'll mention is I'm curious about the rotation
Yeah.
because we've seen, I mean, Caden Cooper and Luke Northweather got some decent minutes early in the season, but it's been pretty clear to me the last few games that I mean, this team's got an 8-man rotation.
Yeah.
And I think Sam Godwin has not only lasted longer than I thought he would in the starting lineup, but he's played pretty well. I kind of thought Hughley at some point would maybe take that role. That hasn't happened, and I think they've found a good rhythm. But it's been Hughley, it's been Darthard, it's been Soares off the bench. But I'm not only curious to see how strict Porter is with that 8-man rotation. Is that a firm eight man rotation? No minutes for Caden Cooper, Luke Northweather, or anybody else. And I'm curious, how much does he lean on his starters? Like how much does he play Javian McCollum? Is this 30 minutes? Is it 37 minutes? How much time does that bench get? I think that's going to be pretty interesting to see because Porter's talked a lot about having 8 starters, but I'm wondering when you get into conference play, and I think Saturday night, I don't know who's going to win. I think it's going to be a really close game regardless. This just has the makings of a game that's going to
Yeah.
go to crunch time. What does Porter do? What do you think? How much is this no, we're going to play these 8 guys about equally like they have all year, or how much is it no, we need to find, when the going gets tough, these are the 5 or 6 we're going to.
It's hard to really have 8 starters and succeed. I mean, you kind of gotta have your 5, 6 guys that are gonna play the bulk of the minutes when you can't have 8 guys who are in the rotation. But really the only team I've seen really succeed a lot at that was that Baylor team that won the national championship. They had essentially 8 starters. But you mentioned the rotation, and this was something that I've been thinking about for a little bit. I'm wondering what it's going to take for Caden Cooper to get in and get some Dart Hard's minutes or Soares minutes. Because I mean, I've had some few people ask me what can Caden Cooper not do that Dart Hard can. Right now, Dart Hard's not shooting the ball that well. He's defending pretty well, but Cooper could as well. So I don't know. It's a pretty interesting topic. You mentioned how strict he'll be with that rotation, and when does a guy like Cooper and Norweather get a chance? I think best case scenario, that's your 8-man rotation, all Big 12. But what happens when they get into foul trouble? Against North Carolina, they brought in Luke Norweather, and he played, spot minutes, like 1-2 minutes. So I don't know. That's something that's going to be interesting. And I think, like you mentioned, they got to figure out 5-6 guys are going to go to in crunch time. I think those 5-6 guys are probably the starting five, and probably Rivaldo Soares, because he kind of does a lot of things really well. So the bench is interesting. They got it. I think all three of those guys could be better than they've been recently. Both Soares and Darhard and Hughley could shoot the ball much better. So I am interested to see what happens if that bench really starts struggling. Is Moser going to look down and say, "Hey, let's give Cooper some minutes"? Because last year, similar situation, he gave Oweh some minutes, and Oweh took it and ran with it. And I think if Cooper did get some minutes, he would do the same thing. But I am interested to see kind of how he balances that in Big 12 play.
It all starts on Saturday, man. This is when the season ramps up, and there's more pressure on this Oklahoma team than there has been in a long time to not only succeed in conference play but make it back to the NCAA tournament. I think OU has a real chance right now to get fan interest, to increase it, to get it going. But they've got to produce on the floor. They've got to get wins on the floor. They can't fall apart like they have the last 2 years. And it starts on Saturday. Brody, that's going to do it for us here on In the Paint, a basketball series provided by OU Insider and the Rivals Network. Make sure to hit the like and subscribe button on this YouTube channel. You'll find a video from Brody and I every single week breaking down all things OU men's basketball, as well as all the other things we've got to offer in terms of football recruiting, football videos, softballs coming around the corner. We'll have you covered there. And if not, you can always head over to ouinsider.com, become a VIP subscriber member or a VIP subscriber. And I promise I'll talk better there than I did just now. But you'll find all kinds of behind the scenes information. You'll find all kinds of written content from Brody and I, from Parker, from Brandon, from Blake, from Brian. A lot of B's. Got a lot of
Yeah.
B names on the
Yeah.
OU Insider, the OU Insider team, but perfect opportunity to either subscribe to this YouTube channel or get signed up at ouinsider.com for just a few bucks a month. But until then, big weekend for OU hoops. We'll have you covered next week on everything that happens on In the Paint.